Aloha! This course is designed for executive branch departments and agencies conducting market research prior to a solicitation to ensure that the government purchases goods and services from responsible sources at fair and reasonable prices. Before we get started, there are a few things you need to know. Click the Next button to learn more. This course provides general navigation functions. Use the Topics menu to jump to a specific topic in this course. Use the arrow buttons to play, pause, replay, or move backward and forward within a section. Use the glossary menu to familiarize yourself with definitions and acronyms. Use the References menu to access the documents and websites referenced in this course. Use the Transcript menu to view the audio narration. In this course, you will learn how to define market research, explain the importance of market research in the procurement process, identify statutes and rules that require reasonable, fair price determinations, explain how to conduct market research, recognize appropriate questions to ask during market research, and identify appropriate market research tools. First, you will learn what makes market research so important in the procurement process. Then you'll be asked to think about factors and questions to consider when conducting market research. Finally, you'll learn about the tools and resources available to assist with your research. Click the Next button to get started. Market Research Basics. Learn what market research is and why it's important. Market research examines available information resources to find a variety of supply sources for goods, services, and construction to meet the critical business needs and requirements of each procurement. The level of effort and time spent on market research is determined by the size and complexity of the procurement. Market research is one of the most important aspects of the procurement process because it helps you determine the best prices for goods, services, and construction. To ensure you are getting fair and reasonable prices, you must know what is available in the marketplace. Market research enables you to develop better cost estimates to determine whether contract prices are acceptable. The unbiased data from market research is used to support those price determinations, quantifying your decisions. This data can be cited to back up your decisions in response to protests or complaints. Before we get into more detail about the market research process, let's take a minute to identify the rules and regulations related to market research. As you probably already know, public procurements are governed by the statutes and its administrative rules. Any market research that you conduct for procurements shall be in accordance with the statutes and rules. The statutes that provide policy guidelines for fair and reasonable pricing are HRS 103D-312 and HRS 103F. Administrative rules for additional costs and pricing guidelines are defined in HAR Chapter 3-122, Subchapter 15. You can review some of these regulations. Click each reference and read through the information. Market research is part of the procurement life cycle. Although shown as its own phase on this flowchart, market research is not a one-time, standalone practice. It is an ongoing process that occurs throughout the procurement planning and solicitation phases. Market research is used to address a variety of issues such as the economic environment in order to understand demand and supply, industry-accepted terms and conditions, industry-accepted delivery and shipping prices, reasonable market prices for products and services, and the types of contracts that should be used to best meet each procurement's needs. Market research is also used post-award to identify the need for post-award modifications. It helps determine if you should exercise an option, if that option's price is still reasonable as a single source, and if there is new competition. Now let's take a look at the process for market research in more detail. There are several steps you can take to ensure a good return on your time spent gathering information. Click each step to learn more. After the procurement officer and the procurement team have completed the initial procurement strategy plan, start performing market research. Even though your procurement team may have prior knowledge about specific goods, services, or suppliers, you shouldn't rely exclusively on this information. To conduct active market research, utilize informational resources such as the Internet, industry organizations, advertisements, and industry publications. Consult with other public procurement officers with similar purchasing needs, review current contracts and historical data, and reach out to the vendor community to request information, which can be done informally by telephone or email, or more formally by issuing a request for information or hosting an industry day. Remember, the amount of time spent on market research will depend on the size and complexity of the procurement. A request for information, or RFI for short, is a method used while performing market research to formally reach out to vendors to ask for information about an industry's goods, services, or construction. An RFI is used only under specific conditions to gather input from the vendor community and isn't considered a competitive solicitation. If you send out an RFI, keep in mind that vendors are not required to respond to your request. Even if a vendor does not respond to your RFI, that vendor may still respond to any competitive solicitation that results from the RFI. You may consider holding an Industry Day event to provide the vendor community with a detailed overview of your procurement requirements and solicit feedback about the procurement. These events may also help you understand recent industry or market developments. Industry Days are particularly useful when you have a complex program or project with multiple contracts of varying scope and magnitude. There are many ways to host an Industry Day, such as webinars, video conferences, or phone conferences. During the market research process, the contract administrator works with the procurement team to develop an internal estimate called an Internal Government Estimate, or IGE, for the anticipated cost of the requirement. These estimates reflect the market research that has been conducted and are vital because they normally provide you with the first indication of a reasonable contract price. The market research you conduct will be critical in helping determine the type of contract to solicit. The contract type defines how bidders will price the goods, services, or construction. Based on market research, you should have a good idea of how the contractor industry prices work. Determining the contract type will be covered in more detail in another training module. The procurement strategy plan includes everything you need for your procurement strategy, such as the scope, schedule, budget, method of procurement, and requirements. The goal of this plan is to place all information you've gathered from market research in a single document. The procurement team should update the original procurement strategy plan based on market research data. You can modify the existing components, or you can add more information or sections to the original plan. Updating the procurement strategy plan will be covered in more detail in another training module. The procurement officer uses market research to gather requirements from stakeholders to determine the essential features and functions that must be met by the provided goods or services. These requirements must be accurate and detailed so that the proposed solution will meet agency expectations and improve procurement outcomes. Specifications and a statement of work are developed based on these requirements. Finalizing the specifications and writing a statement of work will be covered in more detail in another training module. Proposal evaluations typically consist of an assessment of the mandatory requirements, evaluation criteria, and cost or price. In general, evaluation criteria should be tailored to each procurement and include only those factors which will have an impact on contractor selection. As you evaluate competing proposals, you can use these criteria to consider their similarities and differences, as well as their strengths and weaknesses, in order to make a sound decision. Developing a proposal evaluation strategy will be covered in more detail in another training module.
Wow, there's a lot that goes into market research. What if I don't have time to do it all?
There are a lot of tools and resources that can help you streamline the market research process. You will learn about these options later in this training course. Now that you have learned about the market research process, let's see if you recall which of these descriptions apply to market research. Conducting market research. Learn about factors and questions to consider during your market research. There are many factors to consider and questions to ask when conducting market research. But where do you begin? What questions should you be asking? Remember, the goal of your market research is to ensure you are securing fair and reasonable prices for goods or services that meet the government's requirements. To do this, you will need to collect and analyze historical pricing information and current trends about supply sources. When performing market research, start by reviewing historical data. This data may come from current government contracts and your own prior procurements. You may want to reach out to people in your networks or contact industry leaders. You may also want to get in touch with other state, federal, or government contacts. These individuals may have historical knowledge that could assist you with your market research. Each time you conduct market research, the process will be different because of the differences in government requirements, market conditions, and other factors. There are several research factors to consider and typical questions you should be able to answer after completing your research. These factors and questions provide a framework for your market research. Not all of the questions will be applicable for every procurement, and there may be more questions you will want to ask for each specific procurement. The Contract Pricing Reference Guide contains a lot of helpful information to consider when performing market research. Let's take a look at some of the more common factors to consider and questions to ask during your research of historical data. Click each factor to see the types of information you need. You may want to find out what information is available about past prices paid for products and when those procurements occurred. You may also want to determine whether there have been historic differences between prices paid by the government versus other buyers. You could look for a pattern of demand by researching the quantities that were solicited for each procurement and the quantities that ended up being acquired. You may want to find out what the trending contract prices were and how the unsuccessful offers compared with the successful ones. When focusing on startup costs and your pricing strategy, consider thinking about what the contract price included, such as one-time engineering, tooling, or other startup costs. Then consider whether future contracts should include similar or related costs. It may also be helpful to determine if these costs were separate from the cost paid for the item or service. You may want to find out how many sources were solicited for the prior procurement and what they were. Then look at how many sources offered bids or proposals and what they were. It could be helpful to determine whether there were any significant differences in the product characteristic requirements between the government documents from the prior contract and those of the current contract. See if you can find out what the delivery or performance period was in days, weeks, months, or years. Then see if the vendor met the delivery targets. You may also want to consider whether a premium transportation was required for timely delivery. When considering ownership costs, you may want to compare the historical repair and maintenance costs for each product. In this comparison, find out if the full lifecycle costs of ownership associated with the procurement include shipping costs, maintenance, upgrades, surge, and handover. You may want to research the terms and conditions used in other government procurements. Be sure to note any significant differences between the terms of the last contract and those recommended for this procurement. It could be helpful to identify any performance problems that were encountered during the contract. If any problems were present, find out what the historical default rate was for others performing similar contracts. What if I have extensive pricing and information analysis from 7 years ago from a similar purchase? Do I still have to do more market research?
Yes, you should do more market research. You can use pricing and analysis done 7 years ago as a starting point, but it should not be your only research. A similar purchase might have different factors that could affect price.
Government requirements, market conditions, and other factors change over time. This is why, after reviewing historical data, you should research current information. This helps ensure you are using the latest information in pricing. Current information may come from market trends and patterns in current pricing or supply and demand. Let's look at some factors to consider and questions to ask. Click each factor to see the types of information you need. When considering current competitive conditions, find out how many sellers are in the market. Then find out how many buyers are in the market for comparison. Sometimes it's helpful to know the overall level of demand for a product or service. This helps identify whether your volume justifies a lower than market price due to the seller's increased economies of scale. It also helps you recognize the relationship between the quantity you intend to buy versus the quantities that others buy. You may want to watch trends in supply and demand to estimate if demand will be higher or lower at the time of award versus right now. These trends also provide some insight as to whether supply capacity looks like it can keep pace with demand. Consider other market forces that might drive up price in the near future, such as labor shortages or raw material shortages. Also, try to identify forces that might lead to expect lower prices in the future. You may want to find out which firms in the market are most likely to submit offers to a government solicitation and why. Or you could focus on the firms least likely to submit offers and their reasoning. It could be helpful to learn what features distinguish one product for another and which commercial products best match the government requirements. When considering delivery and performance terms, research current transportation costs and see if there are commercial lead times. You may also want to determine who will be responsible for freight charges and ownership of the goods while they are in transit. When considering ownership costs, focus on commercial warranty terms and conditions. You will also probably want to know who owns the goods until they are delivered and accepted. It could be helpful to find out what terms and conditions are used in commercial transactions. Sometimes specific terms and conditions are recommended. It may also help to know what type of contract is generally used in commercial transactions, as well as those used in government procurements.
On the mainland, delivery of goods to my department arrived within a 24-hour period. Why do I need to worry about it here in Hawaii?
Remote and/or isolated areas, such as Hawaii, may result in commercial lead times and an increase in cost due to shipping. Let's see if you can identify the historical factors you should consider during market research. Tools and resources. Learn which tools and resources are available to conduct market research. You learned about what factors to consider and what questions to ask. But where do you find that information? What are the best tools and resources to use? To locate historical pricing data, start by accessing government databases. The best source of information on past pricing is the original file of the contract action. Detailed information and the rationale used to determine reasonable pricing should be available in the file. For that information to be useful, you must be able to determine what the market situation was in the past and how it has changed since then. In addition to knowing what questions to ask, it's important to know what tools and resources are available to find that information. See if you can match each tool or resource with its description. Let's try a few more. Match each tool or resource with its description. To locate current market trends on pricing information, start by accessing government databases. Search for information about the changes in supply and demand to determine whether prices are still accurate. Now, see if you can match each tool or resource used to collect current data with its description. Let's try a few more. Match each tool or resource with its description. I found contracts used at another government agency on the mainland. When I called the vendor, they were willing to allow us to use the contract. Can I use the contract?
No, piggybacking is not allowed. For more information, refer to the Hawaii Administrative Rules Section 3-128-2. One last thing. Be sure to document all your research and notes to be saved in the file for each procurement. They may be important later to back up your rationale for price estimates.
Let's see if you can determine which resource to use. Let's take a look at some references and contact information you may want to use when performing market research. We've covered a lot of information in this course. To help you remember some of the most important parts of the market research process, we've created a quick reference guide that you can save and print. To access the guide, click the References menu in the top right corner of this course. The SPO website contains a lot of information pertaining to market research in the Procurement Wizard. In this wizard, you will find a more detailed explanation of the steps in the market research process. The wizard also links to the rules and statutes you will need to follow while performing market research. Another helpful market research tool is the Basic Pricing Guide. A link to this guide is located in the Procurement Wizard under Section 3.5, Internal Government Estimate. You can find hyperlinks to these references in the Quick Reference Guide attached to this course. Let's take a minute to review some key points from this course. In this course, you are presented with information to help you navigate the process for market research. You should now be able to define market research, explain the importance of market research in the procurement process, identify statutes and rules that require reasonable fair price determinations, explain how to conduct market research, recognize appropriate questions to ask during market research, and identify appropriate market research tools. This concludes the SPO 005 Market Research Training Course. To receive credit for this course, you are required to take an assessment and pass with a score of 100%. Congratulations! You've completed the SPO 005 Market Research Training course. We appreciate feedback and request that you fill out a short survey to let us know how we did. Mahalo!